It is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage our next speaker, panellist, however I'll describe her, the Honourable Jenny Aitchison, who is New South Wales Minister for Regional Transport and Roads. And I did want to just let the audience know in a little bit of background for the Minister. As a former coach tour operator all over Australia and internationally, part of a multi-award winning business, so certainly knows how to bring people to the regions, and definitely a passionate advocate for the regions and what makes the regions sing, if I could put it that way.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. What a great way to get things going. Just a reminder, obviously you've all been using Pigeonhole. It helps us to ask the most important questions and the most pressing questions, so please jump in for that. But let me get started just by asking you to perhaps reflect on your first year in office. How's it been? What do you think is on the list of significant achievements, and what more to do in the priority list?
Yeah, so it's been a wild ride. Having had the portfolio for a couple of years in opposition, we're lucky Joe Halen and John Graham and I had all worked together, so we had that, shared aspiration for things to be better and to play our part in doing that. But then you come into government and it's just so big and so quick, and it just is all happening. And I think I really was trying to think about this today to give a really clear, because everyone just says it's like sucking from a fire hydrant, if you're going to have nice little delicate sips and then it just splashes in your face. But I think that the biggest change, I think, is you feel like you're going to have a bit of a blank slate. And particularly in the regional transport and roads portfolio, it's just been such a big job of cleaning up messes, to be honest. We had, that 2 or 3, 4 years of really significant rainfall event and weather, and then probably not a lot of investment in some of the right places before that for the decade or so. So then it's just trying to catch up, and that's been really difficult. And that's just in the road network. Then you've got rail. We've got rolling stock programs that are behind. We've got rail maintenance that's behind. So there's been a lot of catch up. And I actually reflected sort of as that coming up to that 1 year, I thought, I just really want to get on with our stuff. We did hit the ground, I think, really quickly with the Regional Emergency Road Repair Fund. So that was looking at the increase in funding to the council. So they'd got about $280 million for the regional councils in the February before the election. We added another 390 to that. So that's for the heavy patching and really getting them back on track. We've been trying to get the disaster funding back to councils. That's been a really significant challenge with the changes to Reconstruction Authority and then now betterment. So we just announced today some funding around the Central West Betterment Program. So that's the Build Back Better, getting that, those communities more flood resilient.
That's one of the questions I really wanted to sort of go to in our conversation. Obviously, you will have a program of work that is important to sort of the long-term prosperity of the regions. But we've seen even just recently, last week's rain event, just how impactful that is. How do you go about prioritising the projects that you've got in terms of the long-term vision and responding to those immediate needs that are very difficult to predict?
Look, I think it's all the same. It's just the pace and being able to do lots of things at once. So I look at my vision for transport and roads in New South Wales is that it's a social determinant of education, health, opportunity and jobs. It's about connecting people with those, and it's vital for social inclusion and absolutely for resilience. So, we're all the time looking at that big picture of how do we look strategically and regionally at the networks, whether it's freight, whether it's road, freight or passenger, and then whether it's rail or road or active transport or air. How is that all working together? One of the things that we're looking at developing is strategic regional integrated transport plans, which will mirror the New South Wales planning region. So instead of looking at what's the electoral margin, what's the upcoming by-election, which, to be honest, was how a lot of this stuff seemed to go. We say, OK, this is a region and it needs to have access to hospitals, it needs to have access to schools. Planning's going to make the decisions about where they go. Transport needs to be on the same piece of paper when we're building the networks that get us there. And so that's that part. When you get to disaster, if you've actually got this strategic piece in your background, that can just work along, and then you can do the emergency response that you need to do, because it's the same principle. It's connecting people. So if we look at the Megalong Valley today, we've got that pedestrian pathway has been re-established. We've got shuttle buses either side. That's the emergency. Then we'll look at the emergency repair work that we can do, and then the betterment as we go forward. So it's, if you don't have that North Star at the beginning, then I think you really struggle in emergency because you're just floundering. You don't know what you're doing.
How do you think about the public transport equation here, and how you're prioritising and thinking about the public transport needs of people living outside of the CBD?
Yeah, that is really a big one for me, because we did see a lot of focus on roads, and rightly so, with the potholes, and people are doing that. And we know that in the regional areas you don't have volume, but we have some really significant changes that have happened in the last few years. You've got things like the renewable energy zones have come out in the region, so that's changing the way that people are moving around and the kind of material that's needing to go on road and rail. Then you've also got the post-COVID migration to regional centres, and you've got people who aren't looking at moving to Sydney to work, they're staying in region, and then when they want to get back, they want a really robust, not so much a frequent, but a robust transport mode that can get them back. And they have an expectation of public transport. So I think there's a once in a generation opportunity to look at transport in that space. The former government had the 16 cities program, and unfortunately not funded for the whole 16 cities. But we're looking at that, but we're also looking at how can we repurpose some of that public transport in the region. So instead of saying we've got this much money to spend on regional transport, that's it. Let's have a look at what are the assets we've got out there, whether they're rail, whether they're bus, whether they're point-to-point, whether they're community transport. How can we fill a need that is better and more adaptive in that way? There's a lot of school buses in regional New South Wales that could potentially be used for public transport, but then there's an accessibility issue because most of them are raised floor. But they don't need to be. It's not like they're four-wheel drives you'd have out at Uluru. They're just there for luggage. We could look at how we could make that a better outcome.
Yeah. There's a question through Pigeonhole around the amount of money that's being spent, and a question around whether in real terms the budget is keeping up with what's needed. I guess I'd open that question a little bit and ask you, how are you thinking about the resourcing requirement within budget constraints, and how are you thinking about also through the lens of innovation, which we heard so much of in the previous conversation around doing things differently and making sure we're getting more productive outcomes?
Look, I was so excited to be. I just caught the end of that last presentation. The data is so key. I remember being at a presentation where the former minister actually said you can't get a BCR west of the Great Divide if you just try and do it the way we've been doing it. But the idea then is just give up, or just give it to projects that maybe don't meet their BCR. My point is you have to have the data right. And I had a conversation with some of the presenters. I came to government sort of looking through the fence thinking there's a big data mine on the other side of it, and then getting there and it was just not there. When we did the $390 million, I thought that's really easy. And then I was told by the department when they did the $280 million earlier in the year, they actually had to have a wrangle with some councils about how many kilometres of road they have. Now, that's a pretty basic number to not have right. And so, we really have to work on that. We're looking at, the former government had the reclassification program that some of you might know of. It was really about saying to councils, it's really hard to maintain your roads. So if you like, you can put them through to an independent panel and we might reclassify them and we might look after them for you as a state government. What we're saying is we want to make that not a once every 10-year process. We want to have proper categorisation of our roads. If it's a local road, it's a local road. If it's a state or a regional one, we're very clear on that. And if we look at some of the roads in our Aboriginal communities, they're not even classified as any kind of road other than a private road. So, when they're going through disasters, for example, it's like saying, Bunnings can fix their road, why can't that community? It's a private road. Like, it doesn't make sense. So get the parameters right, get the data sets right, and then we can start getting those BCRs and we don't have to give up on it. And the other thing I'd just say on that too, we get a lot of stick around the regional seniors travel card, which was a card that the former government gave out, $250 to seniors every year, 2 tanks of petrol. Over 4 years, that was $390 million. Now, that just sits so wrong with me. Like, it just is such a problem when I've got, communities that are really struggling to get infrastructure, to get public transport. And when we know that 97% of that funding was used on petrol, not on public transport tickets, that's a problem. It's like a giving up and saying we can't do public transport in the regions, we'll just give people cash and they can make their own way. That's not what our government's about.
So you've mentioned petrol, which is a really nice segue for me into EVs.
Yes, yes.
So obviously, as we as a country look to progress our decarbonisation agenda, transport and how we think about the challenges in Australia, given its large geography, that's a big question, big question for your portfolio.
Yeah.
Interested in your sort of broader comments around how you're seeing that through the transport perspective. There's a question specifically about infrastructure for electric vehicles, I think for passengers and households, but also the heavy vehicle industry and as we think about transport of goods to the regions.
Yeah, so there's a variety of aspects here. I'll really quickly say, full disclosure, I do have an electric vehicle. I took it down to Melbourne over Easter. We actually had to eat really quickly so we could beat the charger, right? So if you're thinking about doing it, just lean in and do it. It was great. So very, very on board with this. We had money with the former government, I think, in fact, and the NRMA, there was a joint program there for rolling out more infrastructure in the regions. I know Penny Sharp, as Minister for Energy and Climate Change, is also doing that, so that's working. So that, I think residential, that's happening. And can I just say, it's not range anxiety. It's just like, will you be able to charge when you get there, because there's so many people wanting to do it. My EV has more capacity than my former petrol-driven car, so that's not an issue. It's just when I get to the charger, are there enough of them? But we get there. And so that's that. In terms of heavy vehicles and even to the broader side of things in rail, so Janus is a truck company up on the Central Coast. They're looking at doing battery work, which is really exciting. That's going to create a need for some infrastructure, but what they're doing is sort of like a plug-in, plug-out battery. And, having been in the heavy vehicle industry, when you know that it takes 20 minutes to fuel a truck or a bus, and then you can get in these, they're just putting the battery in and pulling it out, and they're doing some refits and things like that. So that's happening. We've got our zero emissions targets in the bus fleet, and we want to make sure we meet those. And we're looking at a variety of different infrastructure for that, because we know that's going to create loads on the grid. Obviously, this all has to be done, in consultation with the Energy Co and all the other energy providers, to make sure that we do have that renewable there. But that's also why we're looking at things like hydrogen and doing trials. I think I'm up in Armidale maybe next week looking at a trial of ZE bus there, and also I think we've got one in the Tweed. So we are trying to get them out into the regions. And then if we look at rail, I was actually at the ARA's conference earlier in the week, so Australasian Rail Association, and they were talking there about the different technology that's being tried overseas to have that. And I know with the regional rail fleet, we're looking at having bimodal trains, so they're diesel and electric. So I think there's room and space for all modes of transport to get into this, and we just have to be willing to have some trials. We've also got the really innovative centre down at Cadell, which is looking at autonomous vehicle testing, because that's the next bit of it too, which is really an interesting part of the whole story, not just how you generate it and drive the vehicle, but like how it drives itself potentially.
Yeah. I knew our time was going to evaporate, and so it has. No, I think you've just covered an absolute wealth of information and topics in a relatively short period of time. But we've got a jam-packed session between now and lunch. So if I could ask the audience to join me in thanking the Minister, and I'm sure if she finds a way out, you can grab her.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much.